Okay, and the next item of business is a members' business debate on motion 16434 in the name of Michael Matheson on awareness of criminal exploitation of children. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put, but I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons and invite Michael Matheson to open the debate around 7 minutes. Mr Matheson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to colleagues from across the Chamber for supporting this motion and for being here today to explore and also to raise awareness of criminal exploitation of children. There is perhaps no greater concern than children being subject to harm. You don't need to be a parent to understand that our children are vulnerable and innocent. But the fact that anyone should seek to harm and abuse children is chilling and abhorrent in equal measure. Unfortunately, this harm exists in our society today. Today's debate allows us to focus on the criminal exploitation of children and the fact that this is a form of child abuse. Of course, this debate today coincides with two important milestones also taking place this week. The first of which was on Tuesday, which was the National Child Exploitation Awareness Day, which aims to raise awareness of child exploitation and to encourage people to speak out against it. And tomorrow is the first anniversary of the J Review report, commissioned by Action for Children and led by Professor Alexis Jay, who I'd like to place on record my thanks for her pivotal role that she's played in protecting children. Colleagues will also be interested to note that Professor Alexis Jay has also kindly agreed to present to members on the 14th of May. This will give a good opportunity to hear first-hand some of the issues that we'll raise here today in the course of the debate, and I will, of course, alert members to this over the course of the coming days. I also want to offer my appreciation to Action for Children's Chief Executive Paul Carberry. In my time as Cabinet Secretary for Justice and also as an MSP, I've known Paul for his outstanding work with Action for Children. He has a burning desire to help and support children and young people with experience of our criminal justice system. And he also ensured that Action for Children commissioned the very substantial report produced by the Alexis Jay Review. Paul would often cite that those children who needed to be lifted out of trouble and adversity the most were very often the very same children who were least likely to receive effective help and support. An important point which I think we should bear in mind throughout the course of this debate. I'd also like to express my gratitude to Action for Children and other organisations who have provided briefings ahead of the debate today. The J Review found that many children are being devastated due to a system-wide failure and that serious and preventable harm is being caused to children and young people across Scotland and the UK because of criminal exploitation of children. The report was able to draw upon powerful evidence from young people and parents who have lived through exploitation, outlining the stories of drug abuse, horrific violence, threats and psychological trauma experienced. It captured the fear and the desperation of parents not knowing where to turn, some who watched the grooming process happen and others who didn't know it was happening until it was too late. Criminal exploitation can affect anyone, with examples of children from well-off backgrounds with strong, loving families still being exploited. And other children are inherently more vulnerable. Children, including those with additional support needs and disability, and those impacted by poverty and who have experienced part of our care system. Worryingly, black and minority ethnic children are overrepresented throughout statistics relating to criminal exploitation. One of the main issues is the duality of the predicament impacting exploited children. They are both victims who are involved in crime, and they are also actors who are perpetrating crime. When I was Justice Secretary, part of this was addressed through the passing of the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Scotland Act 2015, aimed at protecting victims of trafficking. However, the criminal exploitation of children and how it's tackled can be summed up in broadly 3 areas. The first of which is about identification. There is currently no agreed definition, and without it, we don't have a consistent language amongst agencies on what criminal exploitation of children looks like. I hope in responding today the Minister could outline what plans the Scottish Government has for this, taking cognizance of the important measures that were recently announced by the UK Government through its Crime and Policing Bill, and whether the proposed provisions within that bill on criminal exploitation of children could be extended to cover us here in Scotland. The second area is in the need to quantify the extent of criminal exploitation of children. A lack of consistent recording means we can't describe the scale of the issue or identify achievable outcomes. Our main data source, for example, is the National Referral Mechanism, which is not specifically intended for the protection of children who have been exploited. There is a need also for better national awareness in order to help to promote greater understanding. But it would also be worthwhile for professionals that work with children to have training that helps to inform them of the potential risks of criminal exploitation and to help to identify it. And finally, it's how we as a society respond to it. Consistency is needed across all organisations about information sharing, risk management, safeguarding practices are all needed to be addressing this issue. Services should also be adequately resourced in order to allow early intervention where identification takes place. Deputy Presiding Officer, while a holistic approach across the UK is appropriate, Scotland can also lead the way, driving forward the need to ensure adequate protection for children are put in place to prevent them from being exploited. Criminal exploitation of children is a lucrative business for some of the most sadistic people in our society. We have a responsibility as a decent and caring society to stop this form of child abuse. We need to protect our children and to crack down on those who are their exploiters. And we need to do that collectively together. And I hope the Scottish Government will work with Action for Children in looking at how we can effectively tackle the problem of criminal exploitation of children here in Scotland and across the rest of the UK.
Thank you very much, Mr Matheson. We now move to the open debate. I call first Ros McCall to be followed by Bill Kidd. Around 4 minutes. Ms McCall.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I want to put my thanks on the record for Michael Matheson for bringing this extremely important issue to the Chamber. And I thought his contribution there was equally excellent. It's so important that we recognise that we need to define, collect data and work across bodies to make a change in this. We're very aware of the issues surrounding children and young people suffering from poverty and deprivation in our society, but as already been mentioned by Michael Matheson, this also is a situation that involves children from more well-off backgrounds. As a Parliament, we regularly debate the impacts of systemic failure and poverty on the lives and outcomes of children, and we reaffirm our drive and determination to ensure the promise is progressed and met by 2030. And it's important that we meet these milestone targets, as the essential work in changing those societal issues all stem from the promise being kept. But in those promise debates, we seldom focus on those that would utilise the gaps in the system for their own nefarious desires. I don't believe anyone here would dissent in the Chamber that criminal exploitation of children is abhorrent, and all steps to eradicate it from Scotland should be explored and enacted. I also want to thank Action for Children for their briefing for today's debate and for highlighting their national polling data. It's horrific to think that 130,000 parents within the UK are saying their child has experienced 3 or more of the signs of criminal exploitation in the last year alone. And this is even more staggering when you realise that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Due to the complexities surrounding this type of exploitation, the figures are completely underestimated. Children either don't recognise they're being manipulated as they consider the abuser to be their friend, or they're just so afraid that there could be harm inflicted on either themselves or on a loved one that they simply don't admit to the situation they find themselves in. The manipulation and coercion of children for criminal ends is not a new thing. It's been a long-established process where the most vulnerable in our society are persuaded and encouraged to take up criminal exploits. We actually only have to look at novels by Charles Dickens, Oliver Twist comes to mind, to see how little we've progressed in this area in what is nearly 200 years. If we don't step up and protect children who are falling through the cracks in our system, we're discussing this again in years to come. We don't need to wait another 100 years. We need action. As Action for Children have suggested, we have the Promise Bill coming forward to Parliament, which could make a massive legislative strides in closing the gaps in the system for Scotland's children. Unfortunately, Deputy Presiding Officer, we're not further forward on what the bill entails and the scope of the legislative changes and the outcomes expected from it. I appreciate the time that the Minister has afforded me on this topic, and I respect that this is a complex bill that has to cover many issues. But as we were advised that this will be forthcoming at the start of 25 and we're now heading towards the Easter recess, I'm concerned that delays in presenting the bill will find us rapidly running out of time for it to be scrutinised or, worse, completed. Deputy Presiding Officer, in conclusion, I would like to do what I can to raise some awareness now on this topic. It is important that parents, carers and loved ones are looking out for telltale signs, and these include sudden changes in friendship groups, especially with somebody that happens to be older than them. Changes in behaviour, physical appearance and language like code words for drugs or sex. And unexplained gifts or money or worse, injuries are all signs of criminal manipulation. And I urge anyone with concerns regarding their children or any children they know to reach out, especially to groups like Action for Children, to get the support that they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McCall. I now call Bill Kidd to be followed by Katie Clark. Around 4 minutes. Mr Kidd.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I too would like to take the opportunity to thank Michael Matheson for bringing this important debate on the criminal exploitation of children to the Chamber here today. Now, let's be clear, this is not some distant tragedy. It's already happening in our towns, on our streets, and even behind the closed doors of our communities. There are children vulnerable, scared and alone, being coerced, manipulated and threatened into a life of crime by ruthless criminals who see them not as young lives full of potential, but as disposable tools to be used. I thank Action for Children for their helpful briefing today. The recent reports from Professor Alexis Jay and Action for Children lay bare the sheer scale of the appalling abuse that takes place. The voices of these young people, haunted, fearful and yet so often ignored, tell us everything we need to know. These children are victims. But I'm afraid that instead of receiving protection, they're too often treated as criminals, slipping through the cracks of the very system that was meant to safeguard them. Presiding Officer, let's be clear, criminal exploitation of children is child abuse. However, as we have heard, the lack of clear definition often creates a vacuum. Without a legal framework, agencies struggle to identify victims early and perpetrators slip through the net. It's clear we need a legal definition of criminal exploitation of children, and we really need it now to ensure we can protect and safeguard some of the most vulnerable members of our society. As we know, it is estimated over 130,000 parents across the UK suspected that their child had been exploited, and yet the true figure is very likely to be higher. We are unsure of the true extent, and if we do not know the scale, then how can we hope to effectively tackle it? Remember, these children are not making choices. They are being targeted. Exploiters seek out vulnerability, children in poverty, in care, with additional needs. They offer false promises of money, security and belonging. Then the trap is sprung. Debts, threats and violence become the new reality, a nightmare they cannot wake from. We have heard of children forced to carry drugs and weapons, to steal, to beg, even to commit acts of violence under duress. Children too afraid to step outside their homes. Children wearing extra layers in case they are stabbed. Imagine living like that. That is the brutal reality of criminal exploitation. Children like David, arrested for drug possession, labelled a repeat offender instead of recognised as a victim. His family threatened his escape impossible. But thanks to the intervention of Action for Children, David did find a way out. Now he's in college, working towards a future he can finally call his own. His story is one of survival, but how many more like him are still trapped? In conclusion, Presiding Officer, we urgently need a legal definition of criminal exploitation of children. Secondly, we must strengthen joint investigations between law enforcement and social services. It's not just a policing issue, it's a child protection emergency. And thirdly, we need welfare-first approaches. These children are not criminals, they are victims, and we must treat them as such. Presiding Officer, Scotland has made a promise and to be the best place in the world for Scotland to grow up. Today, this Parliament has the power to act, has the power to uphold this promise. And I urge every MSP in this chamber, stand together. Stand up for these children and let us be the Parliament that ends the criminal exploitation of children in Scotland. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr Kidd. I now call Katie Clark to be followed by Rona Mackay. Around 4 minutes, Ms Clark.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I congratulate Michael Matheson for securing this important debate, because there's no more serious issue than the safety of children, and their well-being and their life chances must be paramount when we make decisions in this chamber that affect children's lives. Can I also thank Professor Jay and Action for Children staff for all their research and hard work to bring the facts surrounding the criminal exploitation of children to light. Their work is a hugely important piece. We should be under no illusion. As Michael Matheson said, the criminal exploitation of children is a form of child abuse, and adults forcing children to commit crimes, adults taking advantage of an imbalance of power to coerce, control, manipulate or deceive a child into criminal activity is abhorrent. Acts such as forcing children to be violent, to conceal contraband such as drugs and weapons, forcing children to give a false alibi or commit theft, forcing children to beg in the streets or vandalise properties are just a snapshot of some of the criminal acts that children in Scotland are being forced to undertake, and we must all do all that we can to protect them from this. The charity Action for Children have told us that nowhere in the UK, including here in Scotland, do we have a legal definition of what the criminal exploitation of children consists of, a point made by Bill Kidd. They have told us that this matters because of the lack of a shared understanding of what criminal exploitation of children is. And that prevents coordinated, joined-up responses to children who are being criminally exploited, particularly responses that happen at early stages, when children are groomed for child criminal exploitation. We have to see a legal definition come forward from the Scottish Government to ensure that those committing these acts of abuse are brought to justice. I noted what Michael Matheson said about the potential of extending aspects of legislation from down south. We know that Scotland is failing when it comes to keeping the promise to some of the most vulnerable children in our care. And I know that the commitments that the Scottish Government have made, but we also know that we are not close to keeping the promised commitment by the deadline of 2030. And we know that this will lead to many more children who may be in care being criminally exploited, with much poorer life chances, much poorer health outcomes, and cause many of these children significant trauma that may have lifelong consequences on themselves and indeed on their families and future generations. The Scottish Government must do more to protect children from criminal gangs or individuals that use children to commit criminal acts. We know that the exploitation of children in Scotland is increasing, and we also all know that we must do more to ensure that no child is abused in this way in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Clark. And I call Rona Mackay to be followed by Ash Regan again around 4 minutes. Ms Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to be speaking in this important debate, and I thank my colleague Michael Matheson for bringing it to the Chamber. I think we all agree across this Chamber that only the lowest of the low would exploit children. But sadly, that is happening across Scotland, as the excellent but shocking report from Professor Alexis Jay in Action for Children reveals. Criminal exploitation of children is a complex, insidious form of child abuse that involves manipulation and coercion to participate in criminal activities that creates lifelong trauma for victims. Action for Children's UK-wide polling last year showed over 130,000 parents say their child has experienced 3 or more signs of criminal exploitation in the last 12 months. And that could just be the tip of the iceberg due to the lack of data. Presiding Officer, I've been a member of the Criminal Justice Committee since being elected in 2016, and my overriding interest is the welfare of children and young people. And despite that, I have to admit that the facts contained in this report shocked me. How can this be happening in our beautiful country? A country that introduced the vision of the promise to ensure that Scotland is the best place in the world for children and young people to grow up, where they feel loved, safe, respected and able to realise their full potential. So I'd like to thank Action for Children for their helpful briefing, which I have to say is not an easy read. It highlights the criminal exploitation that can include the retrieval of illicit drugs and money, possession of weapons, using violence, firearms and harbouring of offenders and providing false alibi for others. Growing cannabis, theft and burglary are street crimes such as begging and pickpocketing are also common. As a member of the Children's Hearing System before being elected, I recall a case of a 4-year-old boy who slept in the middle of a cannabis factory. Just one of the many terrifying things that I heard at that time. So what can we do to eradicate this? Action for Children are concerned that nowhere in the UK, including here in Scotland, do we have a legal definition of criminal exploitation of children. And they believe this obstructs a coordinated, joined-up prevention work when children are groomed for this purpose. And they also believe that as we've heard, the up-and-coming and very welcome Promise Bill can be a parliamentary vehicle to drive through urgent changes to keep Scotland safe, because we must stop children falling through the cracks and getting drawn into this world of darkness. It's all of our responsibility to recognise the signs and care for those who are lost. But we know it can be challenging for agencies to detect and respond appropriately for a range of reasons. The system currently struggles to balance the dual roles of exploited children as both victims and perpetrators. But make no mistake, we must go after the exploiters to protect children. Presiding Officer, any child is at risk of exploitation, regardless of age or background, and exploiters will look for vulnerabilities to exploit. And once bribed, a child's loyalty will be tested, and of course they're scared or reluctant to talk about their exploiters. But we know that certain groups of children are inherently more vulnerable, whether having additional support needs and disability, growing up in poverty or are in the care system. Black and minority ethnic children are also overrepresented. And serious organised crime can play a significant role in this insidious practice. And children can be groomed over time and threatened and targeted in a way that they just can't seem to escape from it. Presiding Officer, as Ros McCall outlined, sudden changes in children are something that we absolutely need to be aware of, and I won't go through. Ros has already articulated those. So, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, let's all just be aware of what's happening to a significant number of children in our country. Prevent exploitation and protect our young people. It's our duty and responsibility to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. I now call Ash Regan, again around 4 minutes. Ms Regan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I also congratulate Michael Matheson for bringing this critical issue to the Chamber, and I also hope that the Government will now allocate time for a fuller debate in the future on this topic. This debate shouldn't be a formality, but a crucial step in eradicating the criminal exploitation of children and our role in their protection. And the decisions that are made in this Chamber are key to creating an environment where the children of Scotland are free from abuse and are also protected from exploitation. And we can't explore solutions to tackling any forms of child abuse without first acknowledging the elephant in the room, which is the systematic erosion of child safeguarding that leaves children vulnerable to that exploitation. So we must listen to Professor Jay, as other speakers this afternoon have said, who has spent many years working with and understanding the consequences of child exploitation. And the recommendations from her reports over several reviews must now be implemented with a sense of urgency. Now, we all have a role in preventing exploitation, ensuring that children are not just rescued from harm, but are in fact equipped with the skills and the support to prevent exploitation taking place in the first place. And our job as decision makers cannot just pour support for exploited children into a bucket when the bucket continues to have its safeguarding base completely eroded, because this is self-defeating. So I want to take a minute to explore the mixed messages that we're sending to children and indeed to broader society regarding safeguarding, such as the language used for children's sexual activity. Now, the law states that sex with a minor is statutory rape, yet how many times do we see headlines discussing the lifestyle choices of abused children? We ask children under the age of consent about their sexual activity in schools, normalising what is against the sexual offences law that is there to protect children. And we are publicly funding lobby groups like LGBT Youth Scotland, which has a remit to provide services to an extensive age range, from 13-year-old children up to adults who are aged 25. Yet FOIs have shown that they are working beyond their remit by accessing primary school children and influencing materials even in nursery schools. So I would ask the Government to respond to this point, if possible, during the summing up. Now, Dr Cass was very clear that affirmation is not a neutral act, yet what has changed to make the materials Cass compliant throughout our education system, reflecting the accepted recommendations in that report? What are the learning objectives and measured outcomes of teaching sex and gender identity to nursery children, many of them not even toilet trained? Children look to adults and to older peers to make sense of their world, and nurseries and schools are a child's first communities, independent of their parents and caregivers. These places have positional authority and have a key role in ensuring that safeguarding is embedded and understood. So if we're seeking to protect children from criminal exploitation, we must continue this important focus on child safeguarding and put it before any other adult-driven agenda.
Thank you. I now call on Natalie Dawn-Innes to respond to the debate. Minister, around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I really want to thank Michael Matheson for highlighting the important work that's been undertaken by Action for Children, Alexis Jay and others on child criminal exploitation. Today's debate provides a timely focus on this deeply concerning issue. Mr Matheson laid out very clearly the risks to all children, and I agree with many of the sentiments that have been put forward in today's debate. Child criminal exploitation is abhorrent. As we've engaged closely with Action for Children and other stakeholders, including Police Scotland, the Crown Office, the Children and Young People's Centre for Justice, COSLA and others on the review's recommendations to strengthen our approach to prevent and tackle this form of abuse. It's important to recognise that a number of the recommendations made by the review are already implemented and indeed are informed by our approach in Scotland. This includes incorporation of the UNCRC, which underpins a rights-based approach to protecting children, delivery of a statutory independent child trafficking guardian service and the operation of Lord Advocate's instructions for non-prosecution of victims of human trafficking. We want Scotland to lead the way in tackling all forms of child abuse and exploitation so that we can live up to our ambitions, our shared vision of Scotland and to keep the promise. Evidence shows that the most effective ways to prevent exploitation is through a focus on education, awareness raising and practitioner training. Last year, I had the privilege of attending the launch of the You Are Not Alone resource for schools, which focuses on the risks and the harms of child exploitation. Co-developed by Young People, I Am Me Scotland and Police Scotland, this resource offers a wealth of information to empower young people to recognise harm and know where to turn for support when they need it most. Mr Matheson pointed to the importance of training, and in line with the review recommendations, we are also taking steps to educate and to empower our frontline practitioners through the provision of resources and training they need to recognise the signs of child criminal exploitation and to respond appropriately. In 2023, we published guidance for practitioners on criminal exploitation on behalf of the Serious Organised Crime Task Force. Many members today have referred to the need for a definition, and this guidance, which supports a shared definition of criminal exploitation and promotes early identification of those at risk, was incorporated into updated national guidance for child protection in 2023. This definition is similar to that proposed in the Jay Review, and both Police Scotland and the Scottish Children's Reporters Association have stated that they are in the process of adopting the definition to inform internal guidance. A criminal exploitation awareness-raising event took place in June 2024 to raise awareness of this guidance with practitioners and leaders across various sectors and to promote multi-agency working between organisations. Yes, absolutely.
Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you very much, Minister, for giving way. And if I can thank Michael Matheson for bringing this debate to Chamber, I think it's a really important one, and it's certainly one that the Criminal Justice Committee that I'm a member of has looked at previously. But I just wanted to highlight on the point of awareness the issue around county lines, where young people, often children, are recruited by gangs, often to participate in illegal drug-related activity. So it was just really to raise that as an issue that is perhaps slightly flying under the radar in Scotland.
Minister, then give you the time back.
Thank Ms Nicholl for that point and would assure her that that is being considered in our overall response to this issue. Education Scotland has also developed a professional learning package for local authorities' strategic safeguarding leads based on the practitioner guidance. This resource supports consistent and evidence-based messaging to teachers and all of those working in education settings. In addition, dedicated Scottish Government Keep the Promise funding has been provided to Action for Children and the Children and Young People's Centre for Justice to develop an improvement framework for all practitioners to enhance identification and response to criminal exploitation, due for publication later this year. To further improve the collective response to child abuse, including child criminal exploitation, we'll be rolling out national multi-agency risk assessment training for social workers, police and health professionals over the next year. We've also provided funding of over £450,000 across 23-26 to support the Anchor Highlands project, an Inverness-based alliance between Barnardo's, Action for Children and Aberlour, supporting young people who are at risk of exploitation, focusing on contextual safeguarding. Now, the J Review also compels us to re-evaluate our approach to this complex issue and acknowledge that children caught in exploitation are manipulated and groomed by perpetrators. I am pleased that the Lord Advocate's instructions for the non-prosecution of victims of human trafficking has been recognised. These instructions were updated last year, advise against the criminalisation of child exploitation victims. And this approach sits alongside the wider reform of the youth justice system in Scotland, which is clear on the need to ensure children who are exploited are viewed through child protection rather than a justice lens. I'd like to make progress, Presiding Officer. We also recognise the importance of support for victims. Backed by £10 million of Scottish Government funding across 23-25, the Bairnshoes programme is already improving young people's experiences of the child protection and justice system, including those who have experienced child criminal exploitation. In relation to data, we are actively working to improve data. Annual child protection statistics, due to be published on the 25th of March, will provide further information on how child criminal exploitation has been reported by children's services across Scotland. Now, turning to the criminality of individuals perpetrating child criminal exploitation, partners on the Serious Organised Crime Task Force continue to use every means at its disposal to disrupt serious organised crime, including child criminal exploitation, and to raise awareness of the serious harms it causes. And we are reviewing the use of existing legislation to better prosecute offenders of child exploitation. And in response to many members' points, we are working with the UK Government on its crime and policing bill, which includes provisions to enhance police powers to disrupt child criminal exploitation and child sexual abuse and exploitation. Scottish ministers aim to take these measures forward through the legislative consent process. The J Review also highlights that children without an immigration status face vulnerability to exploitation. For them, Scotland's statutory independent child trafficking guardian service is vital, as recognised by the J Review. I have much more to say, but I appreciate that time is short. So I will conclude by saying I'll look forward to working with members, Action for Children and other partners in work to prevent and tackle child criminal exploitation, to make Scotland the best place in the world to grow up and where children are safe and are respected.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate, and I suspend this meeting of Parliament until 2:15.